Alright, for this video we're going to talk about the emerger pattern for the mayfly hatch. So the emerger is probably the most effective pattern that I use, the most productive during the mayfly hatch, and it's typically what I'll stick with for the majority of the hatch. So I'll show you how I tie mine, and this is again for the March Brown hatch, but again it works for all the different mayfly species. So this one here is tied on a clink hammer style hook and size 14, and we're using the 6/0 brown thread again. So I'm going to lay my base down, and there's a few more parts to this fly, and it's a parachute style fly. So parachute style flies ride kind of on the surface, but the bottom part of the fly kind of sinks down into the meniscus, which represents the bug as it's coming up out of its shuck or its nymphal casing to hatch, going from nymph to adult. So to start, we need to put down some emerger yarn out the back, or some sparkle yarn, or you can use some antron. I have got some emerger sparkle yarn in a brown olive color, and so you need a little bit of that, and you're going to V it on to your thread and tie it into the back of your fly like so. Pull that up out of the way, and then you're going to want a piece of brown or brown olive goose biot, and you want to wet that before you tie it in so it doesn't break or split on you. You're going to tie it in tip first, right to the back of the fly. Bring your thread forward. Alrighty. You're going to grab your hackle pliers here, and you should be able to get 4 or 5. Oh, it came out. Should be able to get 4 or 5 turns with this. And if that happens, it just means you didn't tie your tip in good enough. There we go. There. Now we got a little bit better base to wrap it around too. Alrighty. And then we start spinning. And this gives it this really nice segmented look, and really represents the shuck or the nymph casing really well. And whoop, there we go. And if you wet it, it shouldn't split on you. And then a lot of tyers and anglers will put their UV stuff on here now, or epoxy this. I have found that it just adds another step. I like my flies to be tied quickly, and they're just going to get smashed anyway, and this stuff holds up pretty well as long as it's wet. So now you've got your body of the fly in there, and then I'm just going to shift the hook a little bit in the vise so that the flat part of the hook, the clink hammer style, has that nice flat base to tie on near the front end of the hook. So I'm going to shift that so that is there. Bring our thread kind of to the middle of that, and this is where you add your CDC wing. And so what I use is the CDC tufts, and I'm going to do it in brown. And this is the tricky part of the fly, because wrapping a parachute hackle around a CDC can be frustrating. So you're going to tie it in with the butt end of the feather towards the back. Give it 2 really light thread laps, and then pull the feather until it's to the tips there. You're going to cinch that down. Bring the thread back onto it so you know that thing isn't going to shift on you. And then you're going to make a loop with the CDC. Like that. Get my fingers out of the way and you'll be able to see it. And so now you've got a loop in there to represent the wings as they pop up out of the shuck and then unfold. So this is a time where the bug is really vulnerable and has a pretty pronounced presence in the surface film, because you got the shuck hanging out and you've got the and then you've got the bug as it crawls up, and there's sometimes a minute, maybe more, sometimes it's a few seconds, just kind of depends on the water temperature and the air temperature on how warm it is and how quickly these bugs emerge. But it's a point of vulnerability and easy opportunity for fish to eat them when they're emerging. And a lot of the times this fly is used at the tail outs of riffles or at the heads of riffles. As the bugs move up the water column, they kind of ride on the surface of the river and as they hatch, and then they have to sit there on the surface of the river and dry their wings out before they can fly away. So again, this is a vulnerable point for the bug, and it's typically when trout will key in on them. And so now I've got my piece of hackle, taking the ends off here, and we're gonna tie this in behind the CDC. Maybe. Make sure that that is cinched down there really good. And then at this point, you're just going to add some dubbing. And I'm going to use Sinuous Fusion Dub in Crusty Nail. It's got reds and browns and golds in it. It's a really good March brown color. And you're just going to build up a little base here underneath. And this will also help get your CDC to pop up straight, which is what you want. And just a little bit more. You want to go ahead and build this stuff up to the head of the fly, because once you get that hackle in there, it's going to be hard to wrap dubbing in there. And so I bring it to the front, to the eye of the hook, and then I work it back towards the base of the CDC, and then you're going to spin the hackle parachute style horizontally around the CDC, and this is the tricky part. You got to be light with your first few wraps and hold that CDC in place. And then once you get it going, it should stay put for you. And you're going to do half a dozen to a dozen wraps here. Build up a nice spot of hackle. There we go. And I like to make these fairly bushy, because the more hackle you put, the better it'll ride on the surface. And so more hackle means it'll ride through faster, more choppy water a little bit better. Less hackle, it has a less pronounced profile. There we go. And at this point here, just a little dash of dubbing to kind of cover all that up. And you're going to pull the hackle fibers out of the way, cinch that all down, build up your head, pull it forward, then grab your whip finish tool, finish that one off, like so. There we go. Clip that, and then clip your shuck so that it's about the length of the body of the fly. Grab your head cement, and give that a dab of head cement. Boom. And there's your emerger style pattern for your mayflies. And I tie this in blue and olive, PMD, March brown, mahogany. And on the clink hammer hook, that hook rides really low, so you get really good hook sets, because the fish gets the whole fly in their mouth. And if you've ever watched fish eat emergers, they kind of come up and they just open their mouth under the surface and kind of slurp them or suck them down underneath. So you really got to watch this fly when you set the hook and make sure they get it all the way in there, or you'll just sting them. But that bottom half of the fly, that bottom end of the fly and the back end kind of sits there in that shuck. As it starts to get wet, it gets air bubbles around it, and it kind of looks like the nymphal casing as they work their way up out of it. And then the CDC wing represents those wings as they pop up out and start to dry off, and then the hackle kind of gives it that legs and also keeps it riding in the surface film. Again, this is one of the most effective and productive flies I have during mayfly hatches. I'll fish this a lot, and this one here is typically used at the tail outs of riffles, right as the hatch is coming off, or at the front end when the fish are staged up and below and above the riffles, keyed up on emergers until there's so many bugs on the surface that they have their pick of whatever's up there. But you'll get fish that only want to eat the emergers a lot of the time, and this is the fly I'll use. And it's a really fun fly to throw. Sometimes it can be hard to see, but that's what you hire a guide for a lot of the time. But also, it just takes some training and some practice. Go out there and throw this and really watch and track this fly, and it'll be real productive for you. And so for the next video, we'll just do kind of a standard dry and its applications. But this, again, is used for the front ends where the water's a little slower, front ends of the riffles where the water's a little slower, and the back ends and the tail outs where it's a little slower. And you have fish kind of staged up 2 to 3 feet below the surface, and they're slowly coming up and sneakily slurping and sucking down the emergers as the hatch just gets started. So say you have the hatch coming off at 2:15 every day. I'm going to start fishing this fly the minute I see those first few bugs kind of start wafting off, even before I see fish rise. And this is what I'll start throwing at the heads and the tail outs of riffles. And you can fish this fly until there's so many bugs on the surface that they're eating anything that's up there. And so a lot of the times you can get a few more trout in the net with an emerger style pattern. So there you go. All right, and then we'll move on to the standard dry for the next part of this Mayfly series.